a little bit about the meeting schedule for the rest of the year. So if you could scroll down a little bit more so we can see the whole schedule. There we go. So we made a couple of little tweaks. As you know, we took the KPM annual performance review offline and just did it by email. And my understanding, there was really no comment. This was more of just a formality review. So we thought it made more sense not to spend a lot of time on it in this meeting. And then we're going to do a follow-up for electrification and major project estimating next month. Both of the meetings, we're thinking remote, but wanted to throw out whether it makes sense to have a hybrid meeting, potentially in October and November. I'm going to be in Salem for OTC meetings, and I just thought it might be time for us to meet again in person. And I'd like to get input from everybody else, whether that makes sense. We can have it hybrid so people can do whatever works best for them. Are people interested in having a hybrid meeting? I might just throw it out there, and let's take the agenda down and we can talk about it. So, thoughts, ideas, yays, nays, thumbs up, thumbs down?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody not comfortable with that?
I like the idea. I'm just scrambling to look at my calendar because I know the AASHTO annual meeting is right around that October time, but I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Well, we'll keep it as a hybrid meeting because that way people who can't be there in person, which, going forward might be me more often than other people because of where I live. But let's give it a try, and then we'll keep our eye on things. And if people are not comfortable, then we'll do a hybrid and you can be remote. Great. It'd be actually kind of nice to see each other again in person. All right, let's look at the agenda again. Thank you, Sabrina. All right, so let's scroll down, and I might just kick it to Cooper to see if you have some additional remarks to get us started.
Thanks, Commissioner. So good to see everybody. Only thing that I have, Sabrina, if you don't mind scrolling up just a little bit. I got you going all over the place with this agenda, but back to the membership list here. I did want to introduce the newest member of the committee to everyone. So Carolyn Sullivan, you'll see the last bullet there on the ODOT side of the list. Carolyn has joined us. I think you're on day 3, right, Carolyn, in the position, but I'll turn it over to you in a second to introduce yourself. But I just wanted to let everyone know that Carolyn comes to us as our next Chief Administrative Officer, and also in charge of our Support Services Division. For those of you who have been on the committee for a while, you recall that was the position Bob Gephardt was in when he sat around this table. So Carolyn is stepping into this role, really important role for our agency, overseeing procurement, the human resources, our information systems, our data branch, facilities, just the slew of kind of internal administrative business support that is going to be so vital to all the things we talk about around this table. So Carolyn comes with a wealth of experience and background, but maybe I'll turn the mic over to Carolyn to introduce herself, but wanted to make sure that everyone was aware that we've got a great new leader on our team, and she's going to be sitting around this table. So Carolyn, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just take 30 seconds. So thank you for inviting me. It's day 3, actually day 2.5, just finished the half day. I'm really excited to be here. I've got a lengthy experience, about 30 years, all of it in private industry. The last 10 years of my experience was with Alta Planning and Design, which is a transportation consulting firm in Portland, where I ran all of the operational groups there, helped to grow them from this big to that big and international. And I'm really excited about getting more involved in the details here and really making some strides forward and helping to tie things together. So
Well, we're excited to have you. And with that, unless Chair Smith has anything else, maybe I'll turn the mic over to Amanda to kick us off, but I'll
I
pause.
just wanted to welcome Carolyn and thank you for joining us. You know, I understand you're probably just underwater, so feel free to sit there and listen or go about your day and we'll fill you in later, whatever works in your schedule. Or if you have things to add, jump right in.
Amanda, over to you, I believe.
All right, thanks, Cooper. So hey, good afternoon. I'm trying to enjoy and soak up the little bit of sun that we're getting this year so far before it starts raining again. So apologize for any background noise. But we wanted to come talk to you today and share our NEVI plan, more or less. So NEVI is the money that we're getting from the federal government, the $52 million for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. It's kind of a portion of our overall plan and portfolio and approach to electric vehicle charging stations and infrastructure overall for the state. We have worked pretty hard on developing a plan to meet the federal guidelines that continue to evolve kind of live, and we've been trying to adjust to those. And so I want to start by giving kudos to staff. We have two folks that are dedicated to transportation electrification, and this is a pretty big lift. I'd say they've talked to hundreds of stakeholders in just the last few months about this program, gotten a lot of feedback, and you'll hear about that as part of this, and developed, I think, a really solid plan. I had the opportunity to go last week to Washington, D.C. and talk with supposedly Secretary Buttigieg, but he had COVID, unfortunately, and was not able to attend. So the other administrators there for USDOT, Federal Highway, and Department of Energy and their new joint office about this program. And I actually think that Oregon, among states, is one of the most well-positioned for this. I think we have some really solid plans, and we've helped to directly inform some of this national direction as well. So just kudos to the team that's working on this, Mary Brazel and Jillian DeMedio. And Mary's going to kind of walk you through where we are on these pieces, where we're heading. We're really going to focus today's conversation to NEVI because that state plan is due by August 1st. We plan to submit about a month from now. So this is really the first unveiling of kind of what the contents will look like, and being able to share that with you in more depth than we can get into with the Transportation Commission. So Commissioner Smith looks forward to the dialogue here. And what we're looking for is if you see anything that causes concern or anything that you think is missing from this approach, happy to take that into consideration as we talk about the overall piece. So with that, I will turn it over to Mary.
Hi there. Can everybody hear me okay? We're all set there? Great. My name's Mary Brazel. I'm the Transportation Electrification Program Manager here at in the Climate Office at ODOT. And we are pleased to share with you the overview of the state plan to propose that we will be proposing to the Federal Highway Administration for the National EV Infrastructure Funding for fast charging for EVs on Oregon's corridors. And we're going to start with just a little bit of context to ground the program. And so try and describe where we are as ODOT, where we are with the NEVI program requirements, and then outline our investment plans. So let's go to the next slide. So ODOT is committed to EV charging. We are committed over $100 million to EV charging over the next several years. We recognize the importance of EV charging to reduce greenhouse gases and transition the transportation sector to electric vehicles. We started over a year ago with a transportation electrification infrastructure needs analysis. That's why we call it TINA. It's too hard to pronounce. That Governor Brown directed ODOT to take as part of the executive order. And this study highlighted the need for a 5-fold increase in EV charging just over the next 5 years. It also highlighted charging gaps, sometimes we call them charging deserts, in rural and underserved areas, including cities near apartments and townhomes where it might be challenging to park and charge an EV. And it became clear through this study how important it will be to use public sector funding to install EV charging stations in areas that are less likely to be served by the private sector. So the federal guidance that comes out, that just came out last week, emphasized really the importance of not leaving this to the market, that we need the public sector targeting areas of need that the private sector is unlikely to go after in the near term. So Tina looked at a lot of all use cases, everything from school buses and long haul trucking to electric micromobility, but focused principally on the light duty EV charging infrastructure to meet the state goals, and specifically rural and urban charging needs, including workplaces, apartments, and townhomes in neighborhoods where Uber and Lyft drivers live and travel, at disadvantaged communities, as well as corridor charging. So we are committing $100 million plus. The time for investment is now. We're all in. And some of this we've got plans for, some of this is still evolving. So let's go to the next slide and we'll look at our kind of high level overview approach to our investments. So we have the different types of funding sources on the left, and we have some of the priorities on the right. So before we dive into a discussion, it's just useful to frame where that $100 million investment is going to go and is coming from, and is where what priorities we're meeting. So our current funding, what we're spending money on right now, is the West Coast Electric Highway upgrades, and that's about $4 million. And the West Coast Electric Highways traverse our major corridors of Interstate 5, US 101, and routes into Central Oregon. And as we're doing these upgrades, we're also adding charging ports for electric bikes. So given cycle tourism along US 101, for example, these are key investments that will also enable electric micromobility. We're also developing a community EV charging rebate program to target underserved communities with charging for longer dwell times, for like overnight charging at apartments or stop and shop and tourist destinations. In addition, we're going to pursue investment opportunities through competitive grants that will be offered in other sections of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And we'll discuss these more toward the end of the presentation, because right now what I'm going to do is focus on our guaranteed share of the IIJA funding, the National EV Infrastructure, or NEVI program, for investments in federally designated EV corridors. Our focus will be on light duty vehicle charging, but we are trying to design these to enable some medium duty charging and support electric micromobility. And as we electrify corridors, you can kind of see we've got some dark lines, dark circles around a few of these priority areas. We're going to be investing in many of rural portions of the state along corridors, but we will also look for opportunities in each of these to prioritize access for BIPOC and underserved and disadvantaged communities. The next slide. So the NEVI program, the National EV Infrastructure Program, or NEVI, is the $65 million formula program from the federal infrastructure law. That's $52 million in federal funds plus 20% match is equal to the $65 million. Funding's allocated to state departments of transportations over 5 years, and ODOT expects to receive about $7.7 million in federal funds for the first year with the 20% in the match. That gets us close to $10 million. And in each of the subsequent years, we expect a little bit over $10 million in federal funding, for a little bit over $13 million per year in each of the following 4 years. So next slide. So what is required? So I'm sure many of you have heard of the Biden administration's goal to get 500,000 public charging stations along our nation's highway. The NEVI program is the first step towards reaching that goal. The objective of this federal program is to build out a seamless national network of public EV charging that's reliable, convenient, affordable, and equitable. And the key requirements of the program reflect this objective. These requirements are designed to ensure a consistent user experience across the nation. So EV drivers know what to expect no matter where they drive and need to charge their EVs. So some of the requirements include, first, each site must have a minimum of 4 high-powered fast chargers to ensure redundancy. And high-powered in this case means a minimum of 150 kilowatt chargers. So just for context, most of the fast chargers in Oregon right now are 50 kilowatt chargers. That's what the West Coast Electric Highway has been. That's what most of the other chargers in Oregon are. So this is a significant improvement in speed. Secondly, these stations have to be located every 50 miles along Oregon's federally designated EV alternative fuel corridors, and in addition, must be no more than 1 mile from the corridors. And there's some limited exceptions allowed, and in Oregon, we expect we'll need to ask for some of those exceptions to the 50-mile requirement on certain rural roads.
Mary, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So on the 150 kilowatt high-powered chargers, what's the typical length of time to power a vehicle using one of the high-powered chargers?
So a high-powered charger, like, again, it's one of those questions that you always say, it depends. But
Sure.
in general, the way the industry tries to describe it is to say, if you're 80% down, so if you need 80% of the battery capacity to recharge, depending upon how big your batteries are, it usually takes no more than about 20, 25 minutes, something like that. That's what the newer cars are able to recharge, about 80% in about 20, 25 minutes. So it's not.
Thanks. I just wanted to get a general range.
A general idea. Okay.
Yeah,
great.
and I would also encourage the rest of the committee, to ask questions as we go along, so it's not just information flow. If you have questions, let's get them out.
Well, I have a question. We're putting the stations in. Are we charging for the power that's coming, and how's that being collected? And
so we'll if you give me another slide or two, we'll get there. ODOT is not going to own or operate or maintain any of these chargers. We are going to do this as we do it with the West Coast Electric Highway as a public-private partnership. And the private sector will be contracted to own, operate, install, maintain, and charge for the electricity that they dispense.
And are there going to be guidelines on what they can charge, or is that just the open market?
Up to now, it's been the open market. It appears that there's going to be, if not guidelines, there's going to be transparency. And go ahead.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in there. So at the event that I was at last week with USDOT and folks, they indicated, so they have issued a notice of rulemaking that they plan to do. So the rulemaking will cover kind of things like interoperability between stations, but also they are trying to get at cost and equity and some of those things to have some kind of standard and consistent experience of users and to make sure that it's affordable and accessible to everyone. So they're going to put in place some requirements. We don't know yet what those will be, and we may need to supplement them, but that's something we will be looking at as well.
So are we going to allow people to bid for these? So somebody owns a restaurant and it's a good place, it's in that 50-mile range, they can bid to get these on a bid process, or is the state just going to pick a spot and say that's where they go? How's that going to work?
If you give me a few more slides, I'll get to all those answers.
Okay,
thank you. Hang on there for just a second.
Just being mindful of the time. So let's kind of pick up the pace.
Okay, well, I was just trying to make sure everybody understood what the requirements are. So anyway, the bottom line is that these are the fundamental requirements. We're supposed to also collaborate with agency partners and stakeholders and develop a state plan. So that's what we're talking about today, is how we're going to get to the state plan. Could you go to the next slide? So the state plan, we're giving you the preview of the state plan, and we're also going to be sharing the state plan with audiences on June 27th. Just so you have a sense of timing, the state plan must be reviewed by a joint office for energy and transportation, and before any funds can be obligated or spent, and they don't expect to do that till September 30th. So late fall and into the winter is when we're really going to be taking a deep dive to work with communities on our first year corridors and get the charging companies on board and getting charging infrastructure investments underway. So in Oregon, as I just mentioned, ODOT is not going to install, own, or operate any of the charging stations, but rather partner with the private sector and others to do so. And we have an aspirational goal to go beyond the minimum standards. So the minimum standards require 4 150 kilowatt DC fast chargers. Oregon aims to ensure that one of those 4 chargers is capable of offering even higher power charging up to 350 kilowatts instead of 150 kilowatts. And we aim to future-proof the sites with wiring and electrical capacity where we're able to for 2 more super high-powered chargers. So that's, we're looking to the future, and we want to make future-proofing a key element of how we use the investments today to minimize station build-out costs. So next slide.
Hey, Mary, while we're going to the next slide, this is Cooper. Can I ask a quick, interject with a
Sure.
quick question just to make sure I'm tracking along the lines of Chair Smith's question? So for those 350 volt charging stations, would that then, I'm assuming if 150 it takes about 25 minutes to do 80%, would a 350 then take 10 minutes roughly, something along those lines? Is that about what we're expecting, or is there some kind of efficiency gain or loss when you basically double?
So that's a great question. That's what we're anticipating, more of that. For example, right now Tesla's super fast chargers are 250 kilowatts, and it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to recharge a Tesla. There aren't that many cars right now that take 350 kilowatt charging.
Okay.
And so we don't really know all of that. But part of the reason that we're doing this, Cooper, is as well that the vans, like the Amazon delivery vans or some of the other medium duty vehicles that are kind of at the low end of the weight scale, might be able, if we do pull through stations, they might be able to use these. And we have requirements that are going to make more and more trucks be electric. And also things like, heavy duty pickup trucks will, are really medium duty vehicles, and they will be able to utilize this charging. So we want to try and sort of use these dollars to kind of get at the medium duty a little bit, as well as the light duty, and future proof them for 10 years. So that's why we're aiming in that direction.
Got it. Thanks, Mary.
Okay, so the next is, where will they go? The funding says we need to spend it on Oregon's 7 alt-fuel corridors, and we're well positioned because we have 4 that run north-south right now. US 101, I-5, US 97, and Interstate 82 up near Hermiston, and 3 that run east-west, I-84, US 26, and US 20. And several of these routes are through rural areas where EV adoption is lower today, but it's critical to get charging in there in order to encourage EV adoption in the future. A lot of the charging stations exist today all on the Willamette Valley and the western part of the state. But even along those corridors, very few of these fast charging stations meet the NEVI requirements. And so we're going to be offering funding opportunities for some of these to be upgraded. We believe that the 52 million plus a match is sufficient to build out all these 7 corridors plus more. And we're able to propose additional corridors, and each year, the Federal Highway is making that a possibility. We're taking a measured approach to that to make sure that we can build out everything. But this year, we are proposing 4 additional routes: Interstate 405 and 205 in the greater Portland area, because the Federal Highway Administration has really asked for us to prioritize and include almost every single interstate that we have in the state. So we're also proposing US 95 in the far right southeast corner of the state, which connects Nevada and Idaho. And for the first time, we're proposing a state highway, Oregon 42 in the southwest, to add connectivity in that part of the state, and also to see whether they'll approve an Oregon state highway. So next slide.
Before you transition real quick, just a couple things to add. So as we talk about building out these corridors, I just want to note, some of them have stations already. So we'll take advantage of those areas that do. We may need to upgrade some of those stations, and then it's adding new locations. So it's a combination of all of those things. As Mary said, the NEVI program, we're really focused on light duty vehicles, but we are adding charging for micromobility. We are trying to think about at least the medium duty side of things with the 350 kilowatt chargers. For designations, we're also seeking a designation on I-84 as a hydrogen fuel corridor, and we have one existing on I-5 that may help more with the heavy duty side, so the freight trucks. Our approach for the heavy duty side is going to be more out of the federal discretionary pot of funding, which is $2.5 billion that we can compete for. So we're not looking at heavy duty build out with any of the NEVI funds. That's, and the feds don't want that either. That's probably where we'll look, is those discretionary funds.
So the light duty, does that include, are we assuming passenger vehicles will be able to use these as well?
Yeah, that's what a light duty or passenger cars, you know,
Okay.
trucks, SUVs, that sort of thing. Up to, you know, pickup truck that's, you know, I'm not sure. A Ford F-150 might be, depends on how it's configured. It might be a medium duty, but we're expecting all of those vehicles to be able to use these.
Yeah, and I think just a finer point on that. So as Mary said, there's only a few manufacturers and cars out there right now that can handle a 350 kilowatt charge. More are trying to, like even the new Ford F-150 doesn't handle the 350 kilowatt yet, but Lucid, Tesla, and some others do. And I think the interest is because the charge time is faster, more people will do that in the future. And that's part of that future-proofing plan, is having the high power.
So will these also have charging stations that the other electric vehicles that can't do 350, will they be able to use them too?
So what's great about the charging equipment is that it recognizes what your what your car can take. So if you have a 350 kilowatt charger and your car can only take 50 kilowatts, the charger will only deliver 50 kilowatts to your car. So all of these will be able to serve the earlier cars that don't have that higher power capability, as well as the newer cars that do.
Mary, as your timekeeper, I'm going to say we're about halfway through our time, so probably hit the, I know your
Okay.
next couple slides are really the meat of it, so.
Yeah.
Well, and I also want to input that we want to have time to talk about some of these issues. So you don't really have all of the time allotted. So leave room for discussion.
Yeah, no, she just a few more slides.
Just a couple more slides here. So can we go to the next slide, please? I'll just highlight this real quickly. One of the key elements of the federal program is to serve everyone. And the federal government has a program called Justice 40, where a minimum of 40% of the program benefits goes to disadvantaged communities. In this slide, you can see the disadvantaged communities are in purple, and those are our alt fuel corridors. So this is something that we're still working through, how to provide the broader range of benefits, such as jobs, training, apprenticeship opportunities, health benefits, and more. We're expecting more guidance from the federal government, but we're going to be working with communities as we build out to try and identify these opportunities. So next slide. So this is getting down into the real strategy. Where are we going to invest first? So, and what does our plan look like? So I will just say, really high level, the plan is required to take a lot of factors into consideration. And I'll just rattle off a bunch: existing conditions, topography, long distance travel patterns, likely demand for charging, contracting strategies, likely costs, utility needs, public safety, cybersecurity, a host of other factors. I'm not going to go into all of those. The most important elements for the planning that the federal government wants to understand are our goals and our specific plan for build out along our alternative fuel corridors over the 5 years. And there will be annual updates to the state plan. So I just want to go over a couple of guiding principles and then tell you where we're going to be placing our first year funding and then our follow-on year funding and why. So the guiding principles that we came up with as we were going through this planning process are aligned with the goals we established in the TINA study, as well as the goals that the federal government has outlined in its NEVI guidance. So these include geographic balance, charging access for disadvantaged and underserved communities, inclusion of high traffic corridors in the earlier years where possible, while balancing other principles, leveraging existing and planned EV charging infrastructure investments from the private sector, and emphasizing connectivity with our neighbors to establish a true interstate EV charging network and to prioritize the federal government's desire to see interstates built out first. So our strategy is to build out entire corridors at a time. So to answer the question that was raised earlier, we would bid out an entire corridor at a time. And we want to build out the original 7 EV alt fuel corridors in the first 3 years out of the 5. This will allow opportunities to build out any additional corridors we propose going forward during years 4 and 5. And we could also add redundancy or more upgrades or freight or evacuation routes or whatever we want to, depending upon our needs and the guidance from the federal government. The rules of engagement are you have to build out all of your alt fuel corridors before you can spend your money on anything else. So we also need to consider cost estimates when we're doing the EV charging station buildouts, because the funding is allocated in annual installments and we want to stretch our dollars. In the first year, we're seeking to fund a mix of rural, urban, and upgrades so that we can maximize our learning in the first year. And we're going to be doing it through public-private partnerships similar to the West Coast Electric Highway. And we're seeking to work with a mix of utilities, both investor-owned and consumer-owned. So the first year targets are 3 north-south routes, 1 long rural corridor, US 97 in Central Oregon, an urban corridor, Interstate 205, that's in the upper left-hand corner, in the greater Portland area, and ensuring that our most traveled interstate, Interstate 5, is fully built out with stations that meet NEVI standards. The northern part of I-5 is already fully built out to meet NEVI standards. That is, it has a minimum of these type of charging stations every 50 miles within 1 mile of the corridor, but the southern part from Eugene south is not. And so that we will be focusing on upgrades to this part of the interstate. And I can go into greater depth into this, but I think I'd like to just give you a quick snapshot of where the future investments will go, and then we can open it up more to other questions. So next slide. So you can see the color codes. Yellow is year 2, orange is year 3, red is year 4, and pretty much year 4 and 5. So in the future, year 2, the focus is on major east-west routes, prioritizing interstates and rural routes. So we're going to do Interstate 84 along the Columbia River, and then we're going to also do Interstate 82, which connects up into Washington near Hermiston. And we're also going to focus on US 20, it goes from the coast through Central Oregon to Idaho, freight corridor, major east-west route. Year 3, our focus is to complete the remaining of the current 7 EV alt-fuel corridors. And we're looking at then focusing on US 26, going through coastal and Central Oregon and linking to Idaho, US 101, which will bolster the existing infrastructure on US 101, some of which will have been upgraded by the West Coast Electric Highways, but it's a big link to California and Washington, and has, but with fewer long distance routes than some corridors developed in prior years. One of the reasons that we're waiting to year 3 to do US 101 and US 26 is that not only because the federal government seeks to prioritize interstates first, and they're making that very clear, but they've also both US 26 and US 101 already have planned private sector charging stations that will be coming online. We're not sure exactly how many. We know some of those plans, and those are likely to be NEVI compliant. So we want to wait and let the private sector build those out, and then identify where we need to fill the gaps. In year 3, we're also going to focus on back in the Portland area, a very short interstate, I-405, high traffic route in downtown Portland, but it's short and we're expecting to only have to invest in 1 station. But what we're really hoping to do is create maybe an e-mobility hub or a multimodal hub. So we want to wait till year 3 to find supplemental funding and work with partners to plan this option. And in years 4 and 5, we're going to complete the remaining electric vehicle alt-fuel corridors that we have proposed to date. That would be US 95 in the southeastern Oregon, and Oregon 42, if approved, in southwestern Oregon. And then once we've got that done, we can focus on additional alt-fuel corridors that we might want to propose, build redundancy, especially along I-5 or other high traffic EV routes, or upgraded the other existing stations. The federal government's going to come out with freight alt-fuel corridors. We may want to do something like that. But that's the bulk of the plan, with the exception of stakeholder engagement. So let's just look at the next slide, and then I think I'm pretty much done. So stakeholder engagement is really key. We started out with a NEVI webpage that we put up. We had a webinar and we put up a NEVI webpage in April that has surveys and interactive map, and we'll show you just a vision of that. All through May and June, we've talked to all kinds of individuals and had 5 stakeholder listening sessions, as well as giving presentations to the League of Oregon Cities or the Emerald Valley EV Association. We're having a webinar on June 27th to review the state plan. It's due August 1st. And then the key part of our stakeholder engagement are the regional workshops that we're going to be developing. As we go forward with each of these corridors, each year by year, we're going to be hosting regional workshops to try and work with the communities, work with stakeholders to identify where those Justice 40 benefits can accrue within the constraints of the program. The program's every 50 miles. It's big charging stations. It's within 1 mile of an exit. So it does not offer tremendous flexibility, but where we can, we want to do that. And so, and we have lots of other communication we'll be doing with people, and then just show the next slide and that'll be it. So this is just, we'd encourage you to look at our NEVI web page. There's a bunch of surveys that you can take, one for EV drivers, one for non-EV drivers. And
Mary, I was going to say, as your timekeeper, I think let's just put that on the screen there for folks to look at and open it up for questions.
Okay,
awesome
thank you.
Presentation.
And maybe before we do, I want to go back to Ted's question, because I'm not sure we hit that as Ted on, in terms of if people get to nominate like their area or their location as like, gosh, I want people to stop and charge here, because when we talk to rural areas, especially, we heard this idea of stop and shop. And a lot of interest in kind of the economic benefit that these things can provide. So just to put a finer point on that, Mary talked about, we finish the plan and then we start to look towards developing RFPs for consultants to go out. And as we do that kind of latter piece, we're going to have regional workshops where we're going to pull in interested parties. We're going to pull in the jurisdiction officials and others, utilities and more, and start to kind of look at maps and talk about where the right locations are kind of within those 50-mile radius, and really start to talk about that. So it will be a collaborative conversation. I think obviously people will want to get theirs. So I think there's some controversy that may come up from that, but we want to run a pretty fair process and pretty open process to kind of where's the right location, what are the different considerations, and working with our consultants to figure that out.
Let's take the screen down so that we can see each other. So Ted, did that answer your question?
Well, I don't think they've gotten into how they're going to pay for this and get people to operate it and all the things. And I think that's a huge issue. And how do we collect the money if ODOT is providing them? Are they going to get something back for it, or is this totally a giveaway? Or, I mean, where?
So we do have a contracting strategy. The current West Coast Electric Highway is done through the Innovative Partnership Program that is authorized by the OTC. It's a public-private partnership. It's a P3. And we have done that. That was put in place 10 years ago. So we have experience doing this. And at that time, we bid out all the entire thing at once. In this case, we're going to have separate bids to start with by corridor. So we'll have one bid that will go out with a request for proposal to EV charging companies that are national companies, most likely, to identify, to work, to propose on what they would do to upgrade or add new stations every 50 miles along US 97 in the areas where it's not currently NEVI compliant. If it's already NEVI compliant, we aren't going to pay for that to build out this backbone with this federal funding. The funding is 80% of the costs of eligible costs come from the federal government. The private sector or other parties have to put up 20%. And there is a standard practice that we have already engaged in for how we go about doing that. They are owned and operated by the private sector. So the private sector will set the prices. As Amanda mentioned, the federal government's going to try and put a lot of strings around how they can set the prices. But we don't own them. We don't own the land. They're not necessarily on ODOT land. They can be at a Walmart. They could be at a Target. They could be at a hotel. They could be at all kinds of, they could be at a gasoline station. They could be at all kinds of different stations, and the site hosts will work with the private sector to develop site host agreements.
Yeah, so they are, it's in a way, it's continuous between corridors. It's not individually owned locations. It's continuously operated by a single provider. And when they get the funds, there will be strings attached because of the way that we have the agreement, and as Mary said, the way the feds set the requirement.
Okay.
And we do have experience putting together RFPs that say things like, we would like to prioritize and we'll give you more points if you put in electric 110 outlets so we can charge e-bikes and e-scooters. We'll give you more points if you put in credit card readers that anybody can use that take chip and tap. We'll put in more points if you do XYZ. And so that's one of the mechanisms that we will use to do that. But the federal government has got so many strings attached on this too. There's going to be standards and data collection and all kinds of things that have to happen through this. I see a lot of questions. I don't know who to call on.
I think Paula was first and then Matt.
Thank you. I'm curious, when you had your focus groups or engagement that you've done to date, did you hear anything from the disadvantaged groups or communities that was different than perhaps other communities are giving you feedback on?
Yeah, some folks, all the disadvantaged community groups like the vocabulary that says we're going to be trying to do the Justice 40. It's part of like, the devil is in the details.
Mm-hmm.
So they were very interested and concerned on whether or not there were going to be true opportunities for them. And we talked about the fact that, look, we understand that there's going to be workforce development opportunities. The federal government says they're going to have additional funding for workforce development and for requiring apprenticeship programs and for community college investment. We don't have all the answers to that right now, but we understand that that is the intent, and we understand that we will be held accountable for that. So they kind of like that idea. Some people wanted to know, hey, can I as an individual bid on this? And the thing is that other people, other stakeholders, and generally good stewardship of the federal funding means that you really want experienced providers developing this, maintaining this. You want it to last beyond the 5-year funding opportunity. You want it maintained and operated and achieve the reliability standards and that sort of thing. So it's not really an easy thing for a startup individual to embark on. People didn't necessarily like that answer, but I think they could understand it. But we have EV drivers who say, please learn from the West Coast Electric Highway. The company sold itself twice. And so we don't want that to happen again. So we want a big, standard, reliable person, or entity. And so
Thank
anyway.
you.
Go ahead, Matt.
Oh, yeah, I see Ted's got his hand up too. I'll be quick. I was just thinking about some of the conversations we've had around this table around, cost escalation, just the impacts of cost, supply chain challenges for simple things, as well as stuff that I think in traditional transportation infrastructure were not challenges. Like getting a light pole now is extremely challenging, where historically it wasn't. So Amanda, this is probably for you. What were you hearing nationally in terms of, obviously Buy America gets triggered with this type of effort, but then what are you hearing around, maybe from national or from the other states, around rising costs of just doing business, and then supply chain challenges of, we're hearing 40 to 60 weeks for some things. So just curious what your take was being back there last week.
Yeah, so we had like 6 listening sessions to hear from folks, and I did share the participants there were vehicle manufacturers and the people that either make parts or deliver the whole charging infrastructure itself. And so it was really interesting to hear from them directly on this. And so I would tell you, in national conversations I've had with other DOTs, we all kind of are worried about the Buy America requirements, and is that going to kind of hold up and delay some of these things, depending on how far down you trace Buy America to, the copper wiring and everything. Can people really comply with that? I think there were people on the manufacturing side that were like, well, if you want us to do this, we're going to do this, but it's going to raise costs. So they did note that costs will be higher to meet the Buy America requirements. And that there may be some delays to get those manufacturers like up and running and able to produce and supply the chain. So that kind of came up. And then in terms of But for the most part, I would say a lot of manufacturers were in favor of Buy America. They said, okay, if you're going to do this, let's do it, and then hold people to it. And then from the supply chain side, yeah, we've had with West Coast Electric Highway transformers come on back order for 6 months. I think that was a pretty common theme that we were hearing across, is that there are some supply chain issues with things on back order and some of the small parts, and especially some of the electronic pieces of things. So, you know, we're watching that closely, and I think that will affect our delivery timeline certainly, and also our costs. I think we have very back of the envelope calculations now, and I'll say to this group, you know, it could be average around $1 million per site as we develop some of these things. So, you know, there's a lot of variability in costs anyway, let alone some of the supply chain challenges, and then some of the just increased inflation costs that we're seeing on other things as well.
So Mac, I want to just second what Amanda said, but particularly on the utility side. We've had conversations with all the utilities to share, you know, what's coming, and we've had a request for information from all the utilities that we sent out, asking where along their corridors there's existing excess grid capacity, so that we can use that information to try and help inform with our private sector partners where the best locations might be, where the least cost locations might be. But one of the things that they have all said loudly and clearly is that if you have to have just a transformer upgrade, if you just need a new transformer, it could take over a year to get a new transformer. It's just, so the goal of the federal government program is to get this out and running and installed within 6 months of the date that they give us the money. But that's just not going to happen. It's going to take, you know, typical before supply chain issues, it could take easily 18 months to 2 years to develop a whole corridor, because it takes time to find the site hosts, get the permits, get the utilities on board, get the equipment installed, get the commissioning, get the NEPA analysis done. All of that stuff has to happen. There's a lot of different steps that have to happen. And those steps in the past have taken closer to, you know, maybe the shortest would be a year, the longest maybe 2 years, or actually that's not true. Longest could be 5 years. It could be all kinds of things depending upon what the issues are. But I think it's going to be a real problem. And we're going to have to manage expectations carefully.
Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, Mary, you made a statement and I must have missed part of it, but maybe you could clarify it. You said we had to get all the electrification done before we can spend any more money. What did you mean by that?
So the NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program, is a formula program whereby $52 million comes to Oregon. That's our formula allotment. And it has to be spent on these EV corridors for these specific charging stations in these specific distances apart from one another. And what I meant by we can't spend it on anything else is that the federal government has to approve our plans and has to certify that all our electric vehicle alternative fuel corridors are NEVI compliant before any of the rest of the 52 million. Let's just say we spent 50 million doing all of our electric vehicle EV alternative fuel corridors. We could have leeway to spend the additional $2 million. It's 80%, we'd have to have a 20% match, but we could have leeway to spend that if the federal government certifies that all our EV fuel corridors are NEVI compliant.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question about the procurement methodology. You said we're going to be using I can never remember the acronym, the Innovative Public-Private Partnership carve-out that we have, and that you have used this before on prior electric highway procurements. I'm wondering, we do have time in our next meeting to have kind of a further discussion on this topic. I think this group would be, I think I would be interested, and hopefully other people might be, to have a little bit more detail about what kind of criteria we have leeway to include when we do this procurement, and a little bit more about, you know, the kind of how we do it, because it seems to me that if we have the ability to say, to add criteria and points to achieve what we're trying to get, that would be useful. And so can we say, yes, you have to have micro mobility charging for bikes and micro mobility options? And can we require there be proximity to other amenities, like somebody could, stop and charge their car and then go, walk their dog or go to an amenity nearby, so that we're not just making these stations
That's,
light, for lack of a better word.
I think great points. And absolutely, I think we have some flexibility to what additional requirements to put on. Timing wise, I would say we want to see what the rulemaking will come out with. So we're going to submit our plan, which is due in August. As Mary mentioned, it's not until the end of September that they guarantee that they're going to look at it and give us any comments back and iterate on that. And then sometime in this time frame, there'll be rules and other guidance that come out that will prescribe what exactly needs to be included as part of the charging. So for example, I mentioned interoperability earlier, or I think they have a lot of interest in the touchless payment mechanisms and things like that. So they'll have some requirements that maybe we want, and they're putting in to the rulemaking. So once we have a little bit better sense of that, I think absolutely, as we draft then the request for proposals, we come back to this group and we share, here's our thought process on what we think we want to ask in addition as a must-have, and what we think we want to ask in addition as a nice-to-have that maybe we give some bonus points to.
Yeah, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why we are thinking we would do a single award to one vendor for the whole corridor. It seems like there might be reasons why we would want to have more options, because we might get it done faster, or we might have, the ability to kind of compare and contrast who did the best job. I mean, help me understand the thinking behind one vendor, one corridor.
If I could add into that, the really good way to bid that out is break it into like 4 pieces or whatever makes sense. And you can bid one of them, or you can bid all 4 of them, or you can bid 3 of them, and let the contractors pick out the ones they want. One contractor takes them all, may be able to lower the price because of supervision and purchasing and so on. And so it gives you that ability to find that out. But you are offering at the same time somebody who just wants to do one area to be able to come in, and if he can be competitive and give you what you need, you get a better deal. So having that flexibility and contracting that out really kind of makes sense, I think. The thing that scares me is the power companies, if they go, we don't have the capacity, we're not going to give it to you. What do we do?
So a couple of quick answers to that. High level, all really good points, really good thoughts that we have also had. But the main thing, I'm going to go back to the TINA study. The TINA study highlighted how much we need in rural areas. Rural areas tend to, it's not always the case, but tend to have lower EV utilization right now. And there are a lot of rural areas that have very little utilization right now. The main reason that we want to do corridors, and we started out thinking we would pair corridors, and we broke it up. And the first year, we can change. The thing that's good is we can change. This is what we're thinking about doing the first year. The main reason to do corridors, a complete corridor, all of US 97, is so that someone has an economic interest in bidding on the less attractive ones as well as the more attractive. If you let them just go bid individual site by site, you could not have your corridor built out. And that's not what we want, because people will cherry pick. The whole point of public sector investment in these charging stations along all the interstates across all the United States is to make sure that you've got a standard set of experiences and place chargers. And if you just let everybody just pick and choose, there's going to be lots of very unattractive sites. So for example, on US 97, really, there's a couple of already NEVI compliant stations in Bend and Madras. So we're talking about maybe, I can't remember if it's 4 to 6 more stations, something like that on all of US 97. On Interstate 205 in Portland, that's 35 miles in length. We're talking only 2 stations. So we're going to break that up. One individual or one set of entities can bid on Interstate 205. They don't have to be the same ones that are interested in a long rural corridor. And for the upgrades and the lower part of Interstate 5, we may require some of the stations to be upgraded, but we also want to say, you know, if you can do it brand new for cheaper, you know, let's see which ways you want to do it. So what we've kind of come to for the first year is to say, let's try one long rural corridor, see what kind of bids we get. Oregon's lucky. We have a clean fuels program that rewards charging infrastructure manufacturers. It also has benefits if you use additional benefits if you use renewable energy. And we've been working with the DEQ, and they are proposing, it hasn't been accepted yet, to actually give even more additional clean fuel benefits to NEVI funded corridors, charging stations. If that's the case, we're going to have a competitive advantage. Remember, we're going to be up against 50 states trying to do this nationally at the same time with the same set of companies for the same equipment. We have to be competitive. And what we're trying to do is to say, let's check it out the first year, a rural corridor, a short urban corridor, and upgrade the best corridor that we've got in the state, but upgrade the part of it that's not NEVI compliant, that's not as well traveled, with both you know, upgrades and or new, and to try and test the waters. But we want to do multiples at a time so that you don't end up with cherry picking, and we don't end up with being stuck trying to go back and get people to bid on stations that nobody wants.
Let's do a time check here. I think we're running a little long. We do have the follow-up at our next meeting, where I think we can dive into some more dialogue about this. Any last minute things people want to say or reserve to talk about next time from the committee? Carolyn, go ahead.
Yeah, if I might just quickly, thank you. So maybe more of a comment to sort of noodle on until the next time is the cost, right? So if it, just to sort of draft off Mary's last comment, if all of the states are doing this all at the same time with a limited number of companies who have the technology and capabilities to do so, those companies are going to charge a premium because everybody's going to want them. So I would maybe ask that we give some consideration to that in relation to our cost estimates, to see if we need to factor in some sort of an upward bound, so we aren't surprised once we get to that point.
Yeah, good point. And again, as I said, we are fortunate with our clean fuels program. There are only 2 states that right now have a clean fuels program. And so that is a very big incentive to charging companies. They're likely going to want to come to Oregon, and not all of them like our idea for a 350 kilowatt charger in one of the sites, but we are going to be an attractive candidate. But that said, there's a cost that you know, it's a timing cost as well. So if you wait,
let's save this for the next meeting, because we're really cutting into the next section today. Yeah.
Mr. Smith, what I just propose is let's look at timing a little bit so that we can come back at the time where we have we're ready to draft the RFP, and we can have that conversation that you mentioned. And then I think also sharing a little bit more broadly, we talked about 2/3 of the 100 million with NEVI. There's another third that we didn't really get into and talk about. And I just want to make sure you folks know that we're more than just the corridors. We have some broader plans beyond that.
Amanda, maybe you and Cooper and Sabrina and I can have a offline discussion, because the way that we have set up these meetings would be a continuation debrief at our next one. So let's talk about that. And I'm mindful that we're cutting into max time for ADA, and so why don't we we'll just move along, and those of us who have lots more questions and thoughts, let's try and keep them for our next discussion.
Good. With that, Sharon, thank you for that. A meaty topic. And I was thinking there's some offline conversations going around just to tie these things together around costs are impacting us across the board, both for what Amanda and her team are trying to accomplish with the EV infrastructure and the stress that's going to put on a variety of things. But where are we being consistent in our messaging? So Carolyn, to your point, where are we lining up our cost estimating risk engineers on our side with the program team that are working to deliver the EV stuff? Just I want to make sure we're being consistent in our messaging as we're talking about just the impacts of doing business and transportation today, recognizing that the needs of transportation are changing. So anyway, nice segue to, I think, when I think about these two topics, Amanda's team is really working on the build it and they will come. And this next topic is they're already here and we need to build it differently. So we got a number of folks on the screen today. Some, I think staff will certainly be listening, but chiming in if needed, but on point will be myself, Mike Kimlinger, our interim chief engineer, who's got the longest history in this topic, who's actually sitting in an AASHTO meeting in Virginia right now. Mike, thanks for being able to join. And then Tony Snyder, our ADA program manager. Tony will be covering most of this presentation, and Commissioner Smith, to your point, we'll keep this tight to certainly provide opportunity for feedback and input from the CIAC members. Real quick, just for context, not foreign, but we've been under a settlement agreement for a couple of years now. We're in the first third of it. So Carolyn is a new member to the agency. This is a big topic and we've been spending a lot of energy on. And so we'll talk a little bit about an update. The benefit and value of this conversation happening this month is we're also planning a July OTC update. And so I think this presentation and the feedback we get from you all will help inform and refine our presentation at the July OTC meeting. So with that, Tony, unless Mike, is there anything you want to add before we turn it? Okay. Tony, why don't we turn it to you, run through a few of the slides you've got here. And we've certainly got some questions queued up, but I think similar to the last topic, feel free to raise your hands or interject throughout. There's a lot of complexity to this. We are under a settlement agreement. So just want to recognize just those complexities. So Tony, I'll turn it to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now?
We got you.
Great.
Yeah.
Starting off on the very first slide, you'll see that the gentleman that's doing the measuring on that ramp had 4 smart levels out there on it. The measurement standards of ramps are so much tougher than they have been over the last 50 years. And for that reason, we have a lot of ramps to fix. The settlement agreement's not just about ramps. There are close to 20 different things we're doing, civil rights and inventory, fixing ramps, outreach programs. There's all kinds of things that we're doing successful on. We do have curb ramp targets we have to hit though. And it's been challenging building enough ramps. There's construction issues and the ramp cost market conditions have been extremely difficult in the ADA program. And we'll cover part of that. And then recalibration is one of the things I need to talk about. So our purpose is to discuss the challenges facing ODOT today and meeting numbers, how we can potentially strengthen the program. So go to slide 3, please. So this was a slide that we put in. We do an annual report every year to report the number of ramps. It's our response to DRO, or Disability Rights Oregon. And the top line was what we had originally reported that we were doing. And you can see that 7,770 ramps is our first milestone, and then 19,004, and then almost 26,000 at the end of 32. This line reflected the number of ramps that we were getting under contract. And so Federal Highway has a procedure that they call advanced construction, where you're allowed to take a project, instead of having all the right-of-way and permits in hand, whichever ones you have, you give one batch to the contractor now, and then you give a second batch when they're ready. And then finally, when the most difficult right of way comes along, you give them the final batch. It lets us build ramps sooner. But if you go to the next slide, please. This is our numbers that if we would have done a straight line, it'd have been 2, 34, 48, 63. But you can see the numbers down below. These are the actual numbers we've got. And so instead of being at 6334, we're at 3700. So to meet our 7770 goal, we have to build over 4,000 ramps this year. It's a huge lift. Now that.
What happens if we don't?
Well, Director Strickler's told me a story about being in WashDOT, and they had an agreement with the courts about fish passage, and they weren't able to hit their numbers and targets. And he said essentially that the courts came in and garnished the WashDOT budget and said it will be spent here when they found us in contempt of the judge's orders. And he said that we need to do everything we can to make it because that's not a satisfactory situation. Unfortunately, the concrete industry, next slide, please. The concrete industry is not responding as well to the increased ramp numbers. Slide 5. As our number of ramps went up, we were doing 500, 700, 1,500. This year, we'll probably build close to 2,500 ramps. We'll get some more ramps from closing, crosswalks that have to be closed anyway. There's a barrier in the middle of the road, or it's a 5-lane highway. It's just not safe to cross. So those crosswalks have been historically closed and no one's used them. But to officially close them and take credits for the ramps not being required, you have to have a ramp closure, a crosswalk closure order, and you have to have signs on each end to inform people it's officially closed. So we'll get some ramps from that activity. But lately, we've had some failures of some bids. We put out a project in Junction City, and we only had one bidder, and they were thrown out because they didn't have their DBE form correct. And we had another one over in Morrow and County, and there were 300 ramps in it. We got 2 bids. The low bid was a couple of million over our estimate, and then they had to throw it out. And then the second one was like 7 or 8 million over our estimate. So we're rebidding both of those. The first one rebid and got a pretty good price, but the contractors they don't have enough construction crews. There's a shortage of skilled concrete laborers in Oregon and nationwide. Personally, I think that's because they don't have the VOTEC shop classes anymore. People would rather go to school and be a barista or an internet person than they would, work in the trades anymore. It's difficult for the construction companies to hire people.
Hey, Tony.
Yes.
Yeah, would it be fair to say maybe at a higher level, I think Commissioner Smith, back to your question around what if we don't reach it? There's definitely some language in the settlement agreement. I would refer to our DOJ partners to walk us through the ramifications of that. Certainly it would trigger a conversation with the judge in terms of if we don't meet that. And there's some real strict legal language, you're an attorney, not me, around how that plays out. It's something we're concerned about. We've been watching it when we think about the larger impacts of just cost estimating and the workforce challenges that we've talked about around this table that are challenging us across the board. But as Tony was just describing, kind of add all those things up together. It's a bit of a perfect storm in terms of labor availability and the shrinking of our deadline to deliver the ramps in a certain period of time, as well as back to Tony's one line chart. It took us a couple of years as an agency to get going on this. We weren't on a linear path in terms of production rate. We needed to set up a program. There was a significant level of effort around what standard we were going to use. There was a third-party accessibility consultant as part of the settlement agreement. So not to belabor that or use it as an excuse, it's a reality of what it's taken to kind of ramp up, no pun intended, ramp up the level of effort. And we're certainly experiencing some of those workforce challenges. I think much to that last conversation too, 26,000 curb ramps across the entire state. So we're not picking where we're doing this work, we were really talking about investments in the entire transportation system, including in some pretty remote and rural areas that need accessible transportation systems. Don't get me wrong, but certainly challenging from a cost estimating and delivery standpoint.
So have we, it seems to me that rather than just bury our head in the sand and say we're not going to meet it, have we started talking to the Disability Rights Oregon and the judge to say we're not going to make it, then we need to modify? Is that happening?
Yeah, Mike, do you want to handle the current, maybe not getting into legal language that
No, I just want to know that we're reaching out.
Yeah.
And that's in the works. Okay, and that's all I just really wanted to hear. So let's go ahead and why don't we drill down into what it is this committee can do to help.
Perfect.
Right.
Effort.
Let's go to yeah, there you go. So one of the things we're doing is we're examining everything about the program and trying to figure out how we need to run the program for the next 10 years to be successful overall. We're looking at what we've done the first 5, improvements, key obstacles, determining and prioritizing what changes will help. So what we're really doing is seeking input across ODOT and external stakeholders, including this group, help us prioritize what improvements have the greatest impact, or if y'all see something that we don't. Y'all are across a number of areas and of both Oregon government and private, and y'all may have input that we hadn't thought about. So down to the last page, we have a few questions that we put together in slide 7. I think we had a replacement for this one in the letter. So is there another one following this that simplified it a bit? No, wrong one. Sorry. Let's just take this one.
Tony, I think the questions on the screen may be helpful for the CIAC members just in the scope and breadth of what we're working on. I think some of the challenges, and Ted, I'm glad you're on today, thinking about just contractor training and capabilities as well as capacity. I think that was a big concern we heard loud and clear in the early days of standing up the program. So be curious any perspective on that. Paula, certainly your experience around a significant program and the delivery of a program that's of this size. I'm beckoning back to our OTIA bridge program days where, significant level of bonded funding to deliver a massive portfolio. And this, I think one of our biggest challenges is as the costs have gone up, how are we planning for that in a COVID environment with all those complications? But then more importantly, where is the funding being redirected from? Because it's not an OTL-like program that's been legislative directed. So those are some of the things I'd be curious, certainly perspectives on. But I think the other kind of point I would come back to is different from the EV conversation we just left where we're trying to build out a system. This is a bit of a zero sum in terms of we got to deliver it all. And I think we're certainly experiencing some challenges of capacity to support all of that. So those would maybe just be some helpful thoughts to open it up for some dialogue. Paula, I see.
Let's go ahead and take the slides down so we can see each other.
I would start for sure with making sure you identify the funding or a funding concept that you can develop to meet the commitment. You mentioned our fish passage program in Washington. We didn't have the money to fund that. Year over year, the legislature finally dedicated a distinct amount to try and get back up to the court mandated level of investment. So you have to come up with the money and you have to protect it, I would say, since you're under a court order. The other thing I'm wondering is whether or not you have considered, like in the OTIA program you had years ago, bundling, making it design build capable so that you can hype up in the industry the opportunity for a major program management, design build something. And if you don't have the staff and capabilities to do it yourself, try and build up enough of a program where you can have the private sector come in and bid on it and propose, and then have certainly all the accountabilities you need around that tie back to the court order and to your expectations. But trying to hit these as one-offs or even within communities or regions, I think is probably at this point not going to help you reach the goal. You're going to have to make a big visible show of it. I think also for the courts to be interested and willing and granting you additional flexibility and time. And I don't mean just a show of it for show, but to actually demonstrate you've got a scheme and you're working on that.
Right. To give you an idea of what we've experienced, in 2020, the ramps cost a certain thing and then doubled in 21. And the first 6 months of 22 is tripled. And so the money that we programmed, it takes a while to get stuff in the STIP. You know, by the time you identify the funds and put it in the STIP, you're several years down the road before you actually get an EA and you can start designing. And we have a design process and construction. And so when we have a program essentially double in cost over a short time frame, it's the process it takes for us to get a budget increase through, even if everybody's agreeable to it. You know, with having to go through Metro for 6 months before we can even put it in our STIP, we lag really behind because we're not mobile.
I think you just have to assign a tiger team type concept and say, this is special, this is different, and this isn't business as usual inside ODOT, and turn it loose on some innovation and creative delivery with the private sector, because I think they can help you achieve those goals. But if you just try and fit it in with every other piece of your program, I know that it's going to be tough.
Yeah, I'm particularly intrigued by your suggestion of doing kind of a design build at, you know, scoping it differently, because obviously the way we have been doing it's not working. And, you know, frankly, one of the questions being, should we accept the, you know, less than the required tolerances? I don't think we can legally. It has to meet a certain percentage slope, and that's just the reality. And accepting something less, I don't think gets us where we need to be.
Yeah, well, one of our difficulties, Commissioner, is you can slide a pencil under the end of one of the rulers, and that changes the percentages. Amazing. You know, in concrete companies, you know, rocks are a certain thickness, and you can only pour concrete to a certain tolerance. So we've lowered the slopes down so if they make a small error, it still works. Initially, in the start of the program, we were building ramps, and close to 50% of them were failing. We're having to tear them out and rebuild them. Now,
I'm well aware in Central Oregon, you can build it and it's perfect, and the next year it's not because of the frost.
95% of our ramps are passing on the first attempt now. And the ones that are failing are minor corrections instead of completely replacement. So we have had some improvements by the contractors and inspectors.
Hey, Ted, I see you've got your hand up.
You're on mute.
There I am. My experience with the ramps, where we could build them and get there on new construction, we had a terrible problem on putting a ramp in on old sidewalks because the sidewalks didn't match. And nobody wants to pay to redo sidewalk to get it the right grades to bring it up to it. They kind of want things to match out, and then you just can't make the grades. So where you're replacing just the ramp, you've got to look at the sidewalk and how far you have to go back to blend everything in, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir.
Because the ramps or the sidewalks are higher or lower, and you can't fit it in and come up with the slopes you have to have. The aggregate is a problem, and we found that using smaller aggregates, we could work it. Slump is a huge deal because you're working with a wet product. You're finishing it. You got your smart levels on it. Everything is perfect. It dries. You get a little bit of shrinkage and some stuff, and it starts throwing everything off. And that's just hard to deal with. You get contractors, and Tony, as you said, you're pouring 10 of them, 5 of them had to be torn out. So the next time you had to bid one, you doubled the price just to break even. They're delicate, but I think it really takes a team to work them and get them done correctly. And the frost problem is there. It's even there in the Portland area where we had them. They were bought off. They were perfect. A year later, we got notices, come tear them out. We just checked them and they're not good anymore. And so it's hard when you've had them bought off and they're using them. Everybody thinks they're perfect. 6 months later, a year later, somebody's telling you to tear them out. So because of all of that, contractors are just staying away from it. There's no way to get in there and make any money at it because you're just ripping things out. You're spending a lot of labor and a lot of time. So got to come up with a method that you buy them off and that's it. You just can't wait a year or 2 years and have somebody tell you to take them out.
Right. I have proposed that we do an acceptance during the contract and we do an inspection and we accept the ramp. And if it turns out that frost or something causes it to go out of compliance, that becomes a maintenance issue and we need a subsequent project to come in later and correct the flaw that has occurred instead of making the contractors come back and repeat work, especially after they've been third noted.
Yeah. On Selwood Bridge, we did all the new ones. We were fine. We tried to do a few of the old sidewalks, but the county didn't want to pay for the sidewalk to be removed and new sidewalks brought in. That became a big issue. Then they gave us a change order for 25 and we turned it down and just said, no, we're not going to do it. It wasn't worth the fight and the battle. And I think you're just facing that with these things.
Ted, can you think of anything that would make it more attractive for the contracting community to want to work on these projects?
Well, you can get in and you can do them and you can do them right, but there's little things you just can't do anything about. If you've got a large aggregate requirement and then you're trying to pour it, the state has to work with a contractor to figure out how do we do it? How do we make it right and do it right, but work together on it? So somebody else is putting a spec together and then you've got to pour it, you try to get it changed and it's, we can't do the change, you just have to do it. So there's a lot of little things that it's just going to take a team working together to make it happen and do it right and buying them off. So you're not tearing them out a year later, because there's nothing worse than being told, hey, go rip them out. And in many cases, we have minority contractors that we're working with on this. They've been paid. You're not going to get your money back. I mean, the contractor winds up eating it. So he just doesn't want to do them. So it can be done and they've been done successfully, but we just have to work together on it, protect each other.
So do you think a design build approach would make more sense? Does that give the contractor a little bit more, I don't know, that kind of forcing that working relationship?
Well, I design build, or I think what's happening is you're looking at the sidewalk that has to be removed. Everybody looks at each ramp and says, there's so many yards there, so much concrete, and this is what the average cost should be, and that's it. And then when you go out and you look at especially old sidewalks, new ramps, there's a lot more work than you realize. So the cost goes up, and then people look at it and go, no, we're getting screwed over. And so, yeah, it's a tough deal. I mean, I would do them with the right project manager that I could work with, and I could do them correctly and get them all in. But you got to have that kind of a relationship, because I've seen where, it's off so little that you couldn't make a change and they want them ripped out. So you got to have that working relationship to really get them in and get them going.
Smith, we're in the beginning of a design build project to be done in Region 3 down in Coos Bay. We just have to put the money in, because you have to do a certain amount of design, about like 20% or something before you put the design build package out. The contractors aren't just starting from nothing. So I've got to fund that and get that effort started in order to get the design build rolling. ODOT hasn't done a lot of design build lately. 12, 15 years ago, we had some, And now they have a big one in Region 4, a press project, and it's got some ramps in it. And we'll be learning from their efforts and putting ours out pretty soon now.
Yeah, design build's tough because the designers used to be our partners and they go in and they do some upfront free stuff, but now they want to be paid. So the contractor's putting money out to bid the job to a design firm. And if they don't get the job, it's just money out of pocket. So I would rather have you do CMGC, something on that order, and bring an engineer in who works for the state, a contractor in, go through everything, bring pricing together and work it. I think you'd have a better system.
Well, do you think that there might be more interest if you did like a CMGC, but did kind of on a regional basis, so that whoever is, selected would have a large volume of work that would make it attractive?
Sure. I think that's more the answer to it. But by doing it CMGC, you get the state and the contractor going out and looking at each one. They're already under contract. So you got the pre-proposal work going on, and they're going out and looking at each one, and they're agreeing at that time, hey, this is what it's going to take to make this. So there isn't any big surprises that come out. So ODOT, right there, they're part of it. They're seeing exactly what has to be done. So you got that three-legged stool with ODOT, the contractor, and the engineer. They agree on every one of them. This is what it's going to take. That goes into the pricing, and you know exactly what you've got and how it's going to work. So
it reduces the risk for the contractor and makes it maybe a little more attractive to bid on it.
It gives them the time and the ability to really go out and look at the job with the owner and make sure everybody agrees. Otherwise, Multnomah County, for instance, just said there's 1.5 yards in every ramp, and that's all we pay for. And so you went, well, you got to pull the sidewalks back because you can't have a sidewalk 6 inches above the ramp. And they go, well, that's your problem. Well, if you can't price it in, it's not going to be my problem. I'm not going to do it. So doing the CMGC and working that team and looking at every site, putting it together, I think is the most economical way and the smartest way to do it.
I would only add that if this is an extra program that your workforce challenges have, not enabled you to focus on, you might consider, even if you're going to do it regionally, have a program manager to do that for the agency like you did with OTIA. That was a good model, and it was really ahead of its time. So that kind of thing can help you deliver something in a focused way so you don't get distracted with all the other things the agency has to do.
True.
Yeah, well said.
Well, I'm going to do another time check. I think we're kind of bumping up against our deadline for today. And I think good conversations. I appreciate everybody's thoughts and input. And we may send out a revised schedule for next month, depending upon the debrief on the electrification. And then if people, we can also add maybe some time to talk about this ADA project in case people think of things they want to talk about some more. So let us know if that, sounds okay, or any last thoughts from people, I guess.
And certainly welcome any input that you guys send us between meetings, or if you think of something, if you get it to Mac or myself or Mike Kimlicker, we'll certainly try to incorporate it into our program with the examination we're doing right now.
Tony, what you might want to do is pull a group from AGC together and talk about how do we make this work.
Yes.
Get several contractors in there. If you need somebody to help you put that together, I can do that with you. And we can bring in the right people and get them sitting at a table and really just brainstorm a better way to do it.
I'm going to industry leadership and talking to Tim Hendricks and a bunch of contractor guys into this month. For one of the things, we've been having conversations with them and incorporated some of the changes they asked in the specs and stuff, but we still got more changes to do. You know, the structure of the AGC, excuse me, the CMGC, trying to find a way to reduce risk or nothing else, know and control the risk.
Yeah.
You know.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Cooper, do you have just a few minutes? We can do a debrief. Yeah.
Bet.
And we'll see you all next time.
Have a good one.